Most founders think investors are carefully reading their pitch deck from beginning to end. They're not. In reality, most decisions start forming in the first 30 seconds, sometimes faster than that. Investors are scanning for familiar signals, pattern recognition, and risk. And the uncomfortable truth is that a good business can still lose the room if the deck creates confusion early. That's why fundraising often feels irrational to founders. They think they're being judged on effort or intelligence when they're really being judged on clarity and readiness. You'll find the full workbook linked below if you want the deeper framework behind everything we cover here. In this breakdown, we're going beyond presentation tips. We're looking at how investors actually think while reading your deck, the shortcuts they use, the mistakes founders repeat, and the hidden signals that quietly shape decisions before the meeting even starts. We'll cover why timing matters more than most founders realize, why targeting the right investors beats mass outreach every time, what traction actually means at different stages, and why some term sheets become dangerous long after the celebration ends. If this kind of practical breakdown is useful to you, subscribe and turn notifications on, because these fundraising systems get much deeper than most startup advice online. The first thing to understand is this: investors pattern match before they listen. A typical VC firm sees thousands of decks every year. They simply do not have the bandwidth to deeply analyze every opportunity immediately, so their brain starts categorizing almost instantly. What stage is this? Is the market understandable? Does this look like a venture scale business? That's why the first job of your deck is not storytelling. It's recognition. If an investor can't quickly understand what category you belong to, the narrative almost doesn't matter afterward. A beautiful story attached to unclear signals still loses. Airbnb's early pitch deck wasn't famous because it was visually impressive. It worked because investors immediately understood the problem, the market, and the business model. The lesson wasn't design, it was clarity. And this leads directly into one of the biggest fundraising mistakes founders make: raising too early. A lot of founders assume there's no downside to just starting conversations, but investors keep notes. If you show up before the company is truly ready, that impression can follow you into future rounds. The dangerous part is that early fundraising often feels productive while it's quietly damaging momentum. That's why the strongest founders run a readiness audit first. Team credibility, market clarity, product evidence, traction proof, operational mechanics. Weakness inside an investor conversation rarely stays private. It becomes part of the story circulating around the deal. And once you are ready, fundraising becomes much more about fit than volume. Mass emailing investors sounds efficient, but reputation capital disappears faster than founders realize. A failed warm introduction is usually gone forever. Strong founders research partner interests, portfolio patterns, and recent investments before reaching out. Stripe did this extremely well early on. They targeted investors already obsessed with developer infrastructure instead of trying to convince everyone. That alignment shortened the trust gap dramatically. This is also where many founders quietly waste months, chasing investors who were never a fit in the first place. I'm curious whether you've seen this happen around you before, because it's one of the most common hidden fundraising problems. Once conversations begin, traction becomes the next filter. But traction is not just revenue. Investors are really looking for evidence of momentum. At the pre-revenue stage, strong customer interviews, wait lists, or signed letters of intent can matter a lot. Later, growth trends become more important than static numbers. 15% monthly growth often tells a more compelling story than flat revenue that looks bigger on paper. The fatal mistake is vanity metrics without explanation. Investors immediately start asking, how was this measured? Where did users come from? And is this repeatable? Trust disappears very quickly when methodology feels weak. And then comes the part founders usually underestimate most: the term sheet. Most founders focus almost entirely on valuation because it feels like the headline victory. Experienced investors know the real leverage is often hidden inside the structure. Liquidation preferences, anti-dilution clauses, and board control can shape the future of the company far more than the valuation itself. One famous example was WeWork. Long before the collapse became public, governance structure and control dynamics were already creating problems internally. The lesson wasn't just about growth. It was about who actually controls decision-making when pressure arrives. At the end of all this, the consistent advantage isn't charisma, it's preparation. The founders who close rounds fastest usually aren't the loudest or most inspirational. They understand investor psychology before the first meeting happens. They prepare the system early, tighten the signals early, and study the term sheet before it arrives. Subscribe if you want more breakdowns like this, and if you want the deeper workbook and frameworks behind everything we covered here, the full PDF is linked below.